Now more than ever, society pressures everyone, especially the youth, to live up to a certain standard and be someone who they might not necessarily want to be. This pressure to put out a socially acceptable image of oneself is more prevalent than ever with social media. Society sets a certain standard for what a man should be and what a woman should be. However, this standard may not align with the values and principles of every individual. This pressure can sometimes form the decisions an individual make. In a culture where society's expectations define us, we must focus on our strengths and individual talents in order to define ourselves and ignore what society wants us to be. In The Color Purple by Alice Walker, the main character Celie is pressured by men and her stepchildren to be a servant who doesn't think for herself and just does what she is told. Celie's interactions with other characters are limited, but she is pressured to be this way by the characters she does interact with, which is her entire society. As the book goes on, Celie learns to think for herself and act in her own interest. One of the first times Celie is inspired to speak for herself is due to a minor character in the book, Squeak. Quote, Harpo say, I love you, Squeak. He kneeled down and tried to put his arms around her waist. She stand up. My name is Mary Agnes, she say. End quote. Squeak was the person Harpo wanted Mary Agnes to be, but Mary Agnes was her real identity. This is a small example of Squeak acting in her own self-interest and acting as her own person. This goes against what society has taught Celie during her life, but she becomes happier as she grows. Celie began the book with low self-esteem and a rough life with nothing to look forward to. Once Celie begins to ignore the negative influences of men and her stepchildren, she realizes her own strengths, her own self-worth, and own individual talent of making pants. She overcomes the negativity in her life and becomes happy. Whether you're a black woman in Georgia in the early 1900s or a rich white male in the early 1900s, it is still important to be your own person and focus on your strengths. Jay Gatsby experiences identity issues, changing his names from James Gatz to Jay Gatsby. Gatsby tries to create a new identity for himself because in reality he is a farmer from South Dakota who comes from a poor family. The reason Gatsby changes his identity is so he could impress his old love, Daisy Buchanan. Back then, being from old money was very important, and if you were from old money, it wasn't socially acceptable to date or marry someone who was not. Nick Carraway understood Gatsby's feelings and hope of becoming a new person. Quote, Gatsby believed in the green light, the orgastic future that year by year recedes before us. It eluded us then, but that's no matter. End quote. Gatsby truly believed in the American dream and that he really did have a chance with Daisy. The concept of hope is represented by the green light, but at the end of the novel, Daisy chooses her real husband, Tom Buchanan, over Gatsby, and he is depressed. The main theme of the novel is the American dream isn't possible, but an underlying theme is that Gatsby would have been happier if he stayed true to himself. He did all this work to change his identity, and he was unhappy at the end. The concept of being true to yourself is still prevalent today in modern theories about society. The Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell makes generalizations about society, but also makes statements about individuality in his theory. The 80-20 theory is his theory that 20% of individuals do 80% of the work on a project. These special individuals are in one of three categories: connectors, salesmen, and mavens. These people may be few and far between, but they all have a lot in common. They are all great at what they do. They all help spread an idea, but most importantly, they are all in touch with what they do best. A connector who knows a lot of people but doesn't share his new product with them is not really a connector. A maven who knows every bit of information on a product but doesn't help out potential buyers is not really a maven. A salesman who doesn't try to sell his product isn't really a salesman. These people ignore society and focus on what they do best, which is what makes them happy and successful people who are capable of bringing new ideas and products into the society we know today. When it comes to ignoring the influence of society, there is no one better to look toward than Quentin Tarantino. This legendary director dropped out of high school to work at a movie theater, which eventually led him to developing movie scripts with a coworker at a video store where he later worked. Dropping out of high school alone goes against societal pressure, but Tarantino still isn't universally popular with movie critics and mainstream media. His films usually receive little to no recognition from the Academy, but his classic Pulp Fiction did win Best Original Screenplay in 1994. His movies are often criticized as too violent or self-indulgent, but Tarantino lets these critics bounce right off him and continues to write movies his own way. Tarantino embodies success by ignoring societal pressure and focusing on your strengths. He has a net worth of over 100 million, an extremely loyal fan base, and multiple blockbusting movies. The piece of literature that spearheaded nonconformity was Walt Whitman's Song of Myself. The poem was groundbreaking at the time of release and still receives universal praise today, being considered one of the best written pieces of literature in American history. The poem discusses themes of spirituality, friendship, American society, sex, religion, but most important of all, identity. The overall message of Whitman's poem can be expressed in the quote, "I celebrate myself." The overall message of Whitman is Whitman ignored societal pressure and was happy with the way he was made, and he doesn't care if anyone else is. All these works of literature have the same common theme. We must focus on our strengths and individual talents in order to define ourselves and ignore what society wants us to be.